Hello, and welcome to part 2 of Tough Guys. Part 1 has been very well received by all. Thank you so much for getting in touch with us on Twitter and telling us how much you enjoyed it. It's been real fun to interact with everyone and see that you're enjoying what we're doing. Part 2 is upcoming, and there is some great stories in this one. We find out what happened when Franny fought Ed Courtenay, and how Franny starts bench clearances with the Coventry Blaze once again, amongst many other things. There's some quick fire questions on Twitter as well. Coming up for you in the next episode, the poll is over and the 14-15 season has won. So we're going to learn how you build a Challenge Cup winning team in just 6 weeks, when Franny takes us behind the scenes of Todd and Steve and all of the new owners coming in back then, how they chose Lordo as coach, all that fun stuff we'll have for you right here next week. But for now, sit back and relax. It's part 2 of Tough Guys. We'll see you in episode 3 next week. Just before we go to, I guess, the third pillar of Tough Guys in Bradford, just a couple of guys that I want to mention. Firstly, we talk about toughness a lot in terms of fighting, but a guy who I thought had a lot of intensity and for me always appeared to be absolutely solid as a rock was Ivan Matulik. Yeah. Would Ivan be someone you would steer clear of when those gloves came off?
Yeah, he wasn't sort of known for fighting because he was that good that he didn't sort of get involved in that. But you just got to look at the physique on the guy to know that if you were getting a clip off him, it was going to hurt. And I do remember it happened. We talked before about being in a face cage and running around, and there's a couple of face cages that were chasing after him, following through on the hits on him, and he lost his rag and he just ripped the cage off and just beat the wheels off whoever it was. And he definitely had that within him because of how big and strong he was. There was no technique whatsoever in his fight. It was just literally throw as quick as you can, as hard as you can. I don't think he was an accomplished fighter, but still, you wouldn't want to clip off him.
He was a talent, like Franny said. His physique was unbelievable. I always thought of him as a body checker. If you got hit by Matulik, you stayed hit. I remember, guys would just they'd go off almost broken in two when you've been checked by Matulik. And a guy, someone sort of similar to that, but I think was a good fighter, and someone I was thinking about earlier, I'd put Ian McIntyre as a real talent.
Just beat me to it. That era, Ian McIntyre. I remember when he first came in, he didn't do that much in his first few games. I think he had probably come from a limited role back across in North America, so he wasn't used to getting the minutes. No. So when you're in that role where you're only going out for 2-3 minutes a period, and then all of a sudden you're playing on a third line and 3-line hockey. I don't think you got the energy to play the way that he would want to. But when he got his legs, wow! What a power forward he was. A great player, great body checker, and one of the most exciting fighters I think as well, because he was so quick.
He was quick.
Just lightning quick. Deadly accuracy, and pretty devastating when he went.
Absolutely.
Another guy I'd like to touch on, he wasn't here for very long, but someone who didn't drop the gloves, who I think everyone would have loved to have seen, Paul Bissonnette. 13 games, I think, we had bids for. Of course, now doing a very successful podcast of his own. But he'd done pretty much everything other than drop the gloves, and you can't blame him. The guy was on a NHL contract coming over the
But even saying that, I don't think it was through him choosing not to. I think a lot of the lockout guys played within themselves when they were here because they were paranoid about getting an injury. Their contracts were null and void while they were playing outside the lockout, so they needed to go back healthy. I mean, I think they all had insurances against loss of earnings because they were hoping the lockout would finish and they'd get back on their NHL contracts. But I mean, there's two guys, and we'll talk about the other one as well. Two guys that I think it is probably, when you talk about fighters and the biggest disappointments in not seeing them go, were Paul Bissonnette and Craig Weller. Because we never saw Wellesley go. No. But again, Wellesley there was times where he would step up and whatever, and then people would steer clear. And jumping back to Bissonnette, up until the point that Bissonnette came in, Belfast had bullied us badly in our own rink. You had that third line of Lloyd and Keith. I mean, Garside's in the middle, who facilitated it perfectly, didn't he? Very smart player, but not a very big guy. But they just had those two going in, forechecking hard, making dirty hits. They were late hits. They were just jumping off their feet, doing whatever they liked, and they were coming into our building and they were winning games. I think I even worked out the stats at the time to try and get a spark into our guys in terms of how many points Lloyd and Keith had against the Devils in Cardiff versus their total league output for the year. And it was, I don't know, it was like half their points were in our building. It was something ridiculous like that. But I do remember in the Odyssey, I'm stuck in the time zone now, the SSE, where Biss was playing for us and Lloyd had done something, and Biss had chased him round the ice and tried to get a reaction. And fair play to Keith doing what he always did for Lloyd. He stepped in to stop the momentum of that, but there was no chance that he wanted to get into a fight with Biz. Keith was, when you talk, we'll probably talk about people on other teams and enforcer roles. Probably one of the best at playing that kind of enforcer role. But Biss would have happily gone at that point, but there was just no takers for him. And then jump up back onto Craig Weller, same thing. I mean, he came in, obviously we're on that world record streak that we talked about in the last podcast, so there wasn't as much need for fighting, but he was making big hits, and normally big hits like that would get a reaction, and not one person stepped up, because they obviously know what he could do, and they'd seen the YouTube videos of him knocking 2 or 3 people out. Extremely tough guy. Both of them, Biss and Weller, extremely tough guys, and certainly one of my biggest disappointments is we never got to see those two guys go live.
Someone we did get to see go very, very regularly was Brad Voth over his time as a Cardiff Devil. Possibly the most unpredictable of all the tough guys that we've had in Cardiff. Someone who loved the badge. John, I'll come to you. Brad Voth as a tough guy in terms of wins, probably isn't on top of the list, win percentage wise, but as someone who fought for the badge, got to be right up there.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the big reasons his shirt is retired. And again, I think Brad is great, but when the announcement of the shirt being retired was made, I wasn't sure about it. And then I think it was Gareth Hubbard who made a point to me and said, well, in very dark days, he was, again, box office for the Devils, and probably kept the Devils known in the local area. And I think about Brad Voth, I thought Brad Voth was an excellent hockey player, and as a power forward, and as someone who would take on any battle, you couldn't fault him. He could score 40, 50 points a season. He led the team. He would take on all comers. Franny can correct me on this if I'm wrong, because obviously I've never fought on ice. I don't think Brad Voth was a great technical fighter. I look at somebody like a Dion Darling as a guy who had fantastic technical ability when he wanted to fight. I think Brad was somebody who tried to use his size and try and get close, but I didn't think Brad was ever a great technical fighter. But as a tough guy with heart and to take on anything and just to put the Devils on his back, you can't look past Brad Voth.
Yeah, I'll maybe got a different view in terms of him as a technical fighter. I think he was very technical in the way that he fought. It just maybe wasn't that open style that you'd get from a Mike Ware or Mike McWilliam. Okay. I know that Voth had been tagged with a few bad ones back in North America just before he came over. So his days of fighting open, because like we said on the Mike Ware, the Mike Ware sort of section, you're only one punch away from getting knocked out. So what Voth did, he was an extremely strong guy. He had big long arms. He would wrap you up so you are not hitting him, and then he would kind of wear you down. There was a lot of wrestling, and then come the end of the fight, then he'd get his arm free, and then he would, he'd take over and win. Okay. The majority of his fights. But when he first came over, I was talking with Phil Hill about this the other day. we were a little bit unsure about what we'd sign because he was like quite skinny, quite lanky, and his skating style was pretty awful. And I remember the first practice he was going out, we're like, this is our tough guy. And we're like, ooh, okay, this could be interesting. And I remember doing a drill, and it was power play against penalty kill, and they had us on the penalty kill. And you can tell what a sort of drone I was in practice. I was put on D on the penalty kill just to give the power play guys a bit of a chance, you know. And Voth had parked himself in front of the net, and I was trying to move him out of the way like I'd seen defensemen do, and I think that's what he meant to do. And I couldn't move him, you know, and he just kind of anchored himself, and you know, and then you saw in games that he would do that and be really effective at it. But as the years went on, he sort of grew into his frame. And you know, developed more size, and he was. I think I would argue that he was the most intimidating player to play for the Devils. As tough as Ware was, as tough as Mike McWilliam was, I think Voth had the most intimidation for the era that he was in, and a lot of that was down to the hits that he would make because he could skate so well for a big guy. He's got 230 to 260 pounds behind him, depending on what season it was. And he, you know, when he hits them, and well, we've all seen the amount of times people didn't get back up or people didn't play again for many weeks. And I remember there was one year towards the end of Voth's career, it wasn't the last year, but it was a couple of years before, that he was thinking about calling time on it. It was probably with all the suspensions he was getting, because there's no doubt he was targeted. You know, he was given suspensions. The slashing on Rod Sarich, I think, when he was just giving him a tap to say we're going, and you know, he ends up with 6 games of that and 5 games of fighting. You know, and I think, you know, he had been just kind of disillusioned with it all, and he was thinking of calling time on it. And I was chatting to my good friend Paul Sample and said, I don't think Voth's going to come back this year. And he just went, Franny, whatever you've got to do to get him back, get him back. He goes, because I've been in multiple away dressing rooms against your team, and that is all everybody talks about before the game. Everybody is saying, guys, keep your head up, that Voth, he'll hit you even when you haven't got the puck, whatever, you know. And it was in people's minds before they'd even stepped into our rink that, you know, Voth was out there and he was going to injure you. And, you know, that is a massive contributor on why we had such a fantastic home record in the Brad Voth era. And he was, I would say, the single most reason on why we punched above our weight during all that time when we were on a much lower budget than, you know, the guys at the top of the league.
Just to add to it kind of sounds like a criticism of him as a tough guy, and it's not. I preferred Brad Voth on the ice. He had a hell of a release on his shot. You know, he was a big guy who could obviously go to the net and cause havoc. So Brad Voth was tough. But I always preferred Brad Voth on the ice. The one fight I do really remember, and it's perhaps the one time he did go open and didn't you know, really care what happened, was the game where it was the first game after he didn't have the captaincy anymore, and I think it was against Hull, and I think Matt Miller was lining up going to fight somebody, and Brad Voth came and gave him a tap and just said, no, I'm going here.
Stephen Burns, poor Stephen Burns.
There was a lot of frustration that came out in that fight.
Yeah, I wanted to give the guy a hug after. I felt that bad for him. But
it was one of the first games I ever commentated on. It was just as I'd started doing it for the DVDs, and I couldn't read my luck in a way. I'd been gifted this fight, and funny enough, Vic Silverwood, who has done a lot with the Ice Guardians, and is the only person who's written sort of PhDs on the subject of tough guys in hockey. So go and follow her on Twitter, because it is a follow you will not regret. She plays that Voth Burns clip quite a lot in some talks she done. She told me as a kind of highlight of how excited I got, what a terrible game it was, and also kind of, you know, how brutal it was too. We will do a Brad Voth episode, I promise everyone, at some point.
If he was fighting Hull, it was just nice to fight somebody on the ice, I guess, as opposed to behind the bench.
I don't know if we want to go into this because, you know, if we do a Brad Voth episode,
go for it.
One thing that Voth wasn't great at doing was he didn't have that switch that a McWilliam or a Ware had, where they could go out at any moment, flick the switch, and then they would turn into the animal. He didn't have that. He needed to be mad. And normally him being mad is because something had done something to his teammates. You know, very team orientated. He was never any good at going off the bat. And where he struggled a couple of times was when there was new tough guys to the league who obviously wanted to make their mark. The first one I'm thinking of is Jeremy Cornish.
Yeah.
You know, first shift against London in Lee Valley. You know, Cornish is there and he's tapping him, and Voth takes the fight, and he doesn't do very well.
No.
You know, and Cornish, and we're like, oh wow, you know, this Cornish guy is tough. But then, you know, in later fights when it happens in game, all over him. And you know, the biggest one that I can remember is Sean McMorrow. So McMorrow would come in and, you know, some, I don't know, GM trying to make his name in Belfast, called him the sheriff, and, you know, got him a sheriff's badge for his hat. And I remember in the hotel there was the local paper, and you look on the back page and there's like, you know, this big article about sheriff calls out Voth, and, you know, there's a whole thing. I remember we went for our pre-game walk around town, and next thing you hear the beeping, and this tiny little car was sitting in the big frame with Sean McMorrow, and he's yelling out the window, "Tell Voth I'm coming for him, tell Voth I'm coming for him." So it got to game time, and everybody would be talking about, you know, all the players were like, "Do you think Voth and McMorrow are going to go? When do you think they're going to go? How's it going to go?" And it was a massive distraction, and G and I felt that, you know, it was taking the focus away from the game. And for the only time in our coaching duo, we actually had a word with Voth, and we just said, "Can you get it out of the way early on so we can get on with the game, because, you know, this is distracting." And, you know, you could see in his face that he didn't really want to go straight away, because he's like, "I'm better when I'm like mad or whatever." And we're like, "Yeah, but, you know, this is distracting." So we almost forced him into it, which was a massive mistake, because he goes out there, fair play to him, he takes the fight. McMorrow catches him with the first punch, cuts him and puts him down, and it couldn't have played out better for McMorrow. And it straight away, I just thought, what a mistake we've made. We should have just let Voth do what he's done 100 times before and deal with it in his own way. And that would probably be wait for McMorrow to make a dirty hit and then step in with, you know, the kind of anger inside him and do a better job. And then I think the next time they fought, it happened in play, and it was a very honourable draw where you couldn't really split up, and McMorrow was celebrating and doing his, you know, that twirl of his helmet and all that kind of thing. And I was thinking, you didn't win that fight, you know, that was a draw at best. And then the final time there was in Cardiff. McMorrow goes out for one of the first shifts of the game and starts running around, and I think it was on the line change, they bump into each other, and McMorrow's jumping, you know, he's chomping a bit to get this fight, and Voth goes with him, and, you know, he beats him.
What I remember about that fight, and different to other, and you talk about the technique, that was a fight, he got a few away quickly, and I don't think he caught McMorrow with 2 or 3 very quickly, and I don't think McMorrow expected that, knew what was coming.
Speaking of McMorrow, this is to spark my memory, there was a fight between Jared Adams and McMorrow, and McMorrow thought the fight was over, and he tapped G as if to say, "Well done," and G threw a left and popped him right on the jaw, and I can remember it in the stands. McMorrow looked at him as if to go, "Boy, that hurt." Like that was a real tough one.
We talked about before how G was really tough, and, you know, and what a team player, and, you know, he'd be one of the first on your team list as a player, you know, let alone as a coach. But I feel I contributed to that some way, because after the first fight in Belfast with McMorrow, where he'd tagged Voth with that one, and he was getting way too big for his boots, and, you know, all the sheriff hats were coming out and stuff like that. I deliberately wrote a programme article, knowing that McMorrow would be nerdy enough to read it, and it was basically saying how nobody on our team should fight him because he's a terrible trade-off for everybody. He can't play hockey. Watch him in warm-up. He can't even take a shot. And it was and I said, you know, to give a balanced view, you got Jeff Swez on the same team, who's a genuine point-of-game power forward, like Brad Voth is. Now, I would take Swez any day of the week. Not a chance I'd touch McMorrow. So, of course, he had read that, and, you know, he was kind of gunning for me. Because I think it was actually the game before that, he was skating around in our end in warm-up. He was doing full laps of the ice because he thought no one's going to touch me. I'm just, you know, beating a tough guy. So the next game, I wrote that article just to try and get a bit of a response. So I was almost trying to get him focused on me as opposed to focus on skating in our end and intimidating players and stuff. So I saw him looking at me a couple of times, so I made sure I eyeballed him, and he came up to me and he handed me a bit of paper, and he's like, it said on it something like www.eliteprospects/Sean McMorrow. Look it up. I played in the NHL. Because he played one NHL game. So I started just giving it to him about, listen, charity games don't count, and look, go and take a shot for me down there. I bet you can't hit the net. And I was just giving it to him and probably getting under his skin. And of course, he takes a shot, he misses a net, so I'm all over him. And he comes at the bench and he thinks that I'm going to apologise or run into the dressing room. So I stood there, so eyeball to eyeball with him, really. And I remember in the old ring where people were hanging down off the back, go on, Franny, all that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, okay, this is good. This is getting a distraction away from my team. And then, a few people come in and they split it up. And I'm like, right, I'm under his skin. This is good because he's kind of focused on that. And they start McMorrow, okay. First shift he goes out there and he just ploughs into G from behind, knocks him into next week, and G's concussed and out the game. So apologies to G about that, because I had wound him up a treat. I think McMorrow got thrown out the game, which was a great result, but unfortunately G was out the game too with a concussion. So I think the next game when McMorrow was playing up, G stepped up and surprised him. Like you say, he tagged him with a couple. He wasn't expecting it, and I think McMorrow thought that was going to be a walkover, but he didn't know Jared Adams was as tough as he is.
Absolutely. Right, we're into the home straight. We've got 2 more things to do. A Mount Rushmore tough guys. Your top 5 Cardiff Devils tough guys. John Donovan, go.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess you have to put McWilliam and Ware in there. Simply because of presence and toughness and what they did. This is a difficult one for me because I prefer more of the middleweights. I tell you what, I'd give an honourable mention to. I don't know why they put him on Rushmore. Is Regan Darby, and particularly for that fight up in Coventry in the Challenge Cup semi-final when we were 3-0 down, or final when we were 3-0 down.
I was going to say it's probably one of my favourite fights, if not my favourite fight, just because of the situation and how much he turned it down. Regan Darby, very, very tough guy. I don't think that we saw the best of it, but extremely tough. And that game, the final was over, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then he steps up against Graham Belak. He beats him, and then it just totally changed the tide, didn't it? It was that moment that the Challenge Cup was won.
Yeah.
It just swung it.
It really
got back in the game, and it carried right through to the. I'm glad you mentioned that.
So at the time, Coventry with 3-0 up.
Yes.
To the good. Regan Darby takes a fight with Graham Belak. He throws so many bombs. I guess you were in the weigh-in now. Can you remember the "Let's all have a disco" chant that started after that?
I just remember the whole.
It was a sort of a party atmosphere, despite being 3-0 down.
Well, we didn't win trophies in that little period of time, and being 3-0 down against Coventry, who didn't have a fantastic team that year, but had been dominant for a couple of years. You think you're not coming back, and I'm with Franny, and certainly from a fan's perspective. When Darby took that fight and won that fight, and it was a good fight, it was 2 guys going toe-to-toe and throwing a lot of bombs, the whole atmosphere just changed in the away section, and we were 3-0 down, but everyone thought, no, we're in this.
And because we were chanting so heavily at the fact we'd had a fight, that's when the immortal, with the Cardiff Devils fans, please look at the scoreboard, came ringing around the arena, and never as an announcer, well, maybe certain announcers, but that is certainly a time where an announcer at a hockey rink has said something that they very much regret.
Yes.
So Regan Darby makes your top 5?
I think just for that fight, because I think it's one of the most...
I like it.
I'd probably put Darby on there, maybe just a standalone for that fight. For technique, I'd put Stephen Cooper on there. And I know he wasn't an out-and-out tough guy, but for a guy who... I remember a fight with Ross Lambert where... He looked like a middleweight boxer. Lambert, thought he was going to throw a right, and then Cooper suddenly throws 2 lefts and puts him down. So I think technique-wise, Stephen Cooper gets on there.
Yeah, one of the unusual things about Coops when he fought is that most hockey fights you grab on with one and you throw with the other, and he did. He squared off like a boxer, didn't he? Where he would lead with left jabs and then have that big right. And I remember speaking to Jim Mannings, legendary
Jim Mannings, absolutely.
Devils fan Jim Mannings, who was Welsh champion himself, and he always used to tell me that had Stephen Cooper trained as a boxer, not as an ice hockey player, he would have been confident of a British title as a minimum, because he had a knockout punch with both lefts and rights. And there is a story about Jim and Stephen doing a bit of sparring, and Jim egging Stephen on, come on, hit me, try and hit me, because Jim was confident in his own ability, and Coops was like, a bit reluctant too on the older guy. And so Jim, I think, tagged Stephen with one, and Stephen came back with a bomb and sat Jim down, and that was the end of the sparring session.
Yeah, that was. He was a tough guy, and I loved his technique. So who have I got? I've got Ware, McWilliam,
Regan Darby,
Stephen Cooper. The obvious one would say Voth, but I like my left field choices. I think Clayton Norris was a good guy, and I might go between either Dion Darling or Ian McIntyre. I think I enjoyed watching his fights because he was so quick. I'd probably put Ian McIntyre on there.
Right.
Okay. Echo all those. Voth would definitely go in my in my top, just because he carried that burden for 9 years, often on his own. That we didn't have any other tough guys with him, and that's a tough role to do when you're just the only tough guy there. Voth would definitely be on there. I'd like to mention Trevor Hendricks too. What a massive reason he was behind the resurgence of the Devils in that year one, in terms of getting us back our identity. And when you talk about, maybe Hendricks not the toughest guy to play, but in terms of an enforcer, I think he carried out the job absolutely perfectly. Knew when to step up, knew when the team needed a lift, whether it was a big hip check or or intimidating people. He used to do it in warm up. He'd line up next to guys that he could get in their minds before a game, and he picked the fight at the right time. So Trevor Hendricks for me gets an honourable mention. Even if he's not on the in that top five. Who else? I mean, Dennis Maxwell was as tough as he can too.
Tough guy.
Not a big guy again, but would take on all the big guys and technically brilliant. And modern day, I mean, who are we looking at modern day? I mean, we talked about the type of tough guys that what it takes to be a tough guy. We've had some extremely tough guys that maybe aren't the best enforcers because they just haven't got that kind of edge to them. And I put in this category Josh Batch, who's as strong and tough as they come. He's a really nice guy. He doesn't really look for it unless it's it has to be done. If he had the edge of some of the guys that we've mentioned before, there's no doubt in my mind we'd be talking about him on that list. Also on there, Lee Salters, who was an incredibly tough guy, but again probably didn't bring it as much as he could. Although an honourable mention to him when he stepped up against Cam Jensen. In the Nottingham Arena when we needed a spark.
Fitzgerald, I remember commentating a game against Sheffield where he went with Fitzgerald.
That was to get the boys going. And Doug Clarkson again is in the same mould where he's heavyweight tough. No doubt about it, heavyweight tough. But again, too nice a guy almost that didn't have that edge that would have seen him taken to that next level.
Best uppercut for me.
Fantastic.
Doug Clarkson's disguised uppercut.
Popping Egner's helmet off in the big blue tent.
Fantastic. How Egner didn't go down.
No,
I really do not know, because he didn't see it coming, and they're the ones that really put you down. That leads us very nicely.
Sorry guys, not that I'm a rule keeper. I limited mine to 5. Franny just named 27.
I was given honourable mention. I wasn't necessarily Mount Rushmore just expanded.
It's like the Oscars, when they have all the ones that are before.
Okay.
So brings us nicely on to what, Gav?
Okay. He's left it open. We'll get it, don't worry.
Okay.
There's a question from Mandy Bates on Twitter about Egner and your
the bench brawl,
the little bench brawl when you and Bia Breyer were stood, and Bia Breyer had his arm around you, I think, at the time when Egner came and.
No, I'll tell you the full story on that.
Let's do it.
So we had a back-to-back game against Coventry in Coventry the Saturday night, in Cardiff on the Sunday night, and there was always feisty games between us and Coventry. And in the one game, I remember Max was chasing the puck down in the Coventry end. He was trying to get there first, and the D-man, there was two of them really close by. One of them was Stephen Chalmers, the young Scottish lad, and there was another guy were close, and Max is going full tilt, and they give Max a shove from behind. He loses his footing, and he goes heavy into the boards, and Max is really hurt, and I think that ended up causing the neck injury where he ended up sitting out, and he had surgery and discs fused and all that. Anyway, so we were pretty irate about that, and I think he may have got a 2-minute penalty, if that. It might not have even been a call. So anyway, the game has been pretty feisty, and there was all that kind of Ben Olsen and Didiomiti, that had been going on, hadn't it, on Twitter, the Twitter wars and stuff. So there was a lot of edge between the two sides. And at the end of the game, I did something that was pretty classless, and I regretted and apologised for after. But the team came to shake. I was bench coach. The team came to shake my hands. Chalmers comes to the bench, and as he shakes my hand, I bring him back, and I just say to him, "You're not finishing the game tomorrow night because of that hit on Beerbrier." And he kind of skates away, kind of muttering and stuff like that. So that was the one night. So we go back in. So temper's obviously still, fueled up from the night before. It's a very physical game in Cardiff. If you remember, Egner was kind of pushing his weight around, and Max, I think, cross-checks him off a face-off and gets thrown out. Because Egner's coming for him, and he's kind of in defence mode. He cross-checks him pretty high. He gets thrown out. There's loads of other incidents in the game. Anyway, the game finishes, and Jerome Judas, who had been like a major instigator in the Twitter war with Didiomiti, they actually knew each other. It started off as a joke, but it kind of escalated. He starts chirping at G. So G gives him a little slap, I think, which is, again, unlike G. He was normally, after the game was finished, that was it. But, that's how tempers are flaring. And I see at the back of the lineup, Ben Olsen skates out with a handshake, and he comes straight up to me on the bench, and he's like, "Don't you ever effing say that to one of my teammates again." So he's expecting me to go, "I'm sorry," and apologise. And I think I told him to go himself. And he was kind of stunned, and I think I went to grab a stick or something like that off the bench, and he sees this, and he then goes back a couple of meters thinking, oh, we're in one here. I was vexed to the max, and he thought it was going to be an easy target coming to the guy in the suit on the bench. But I was like, game for it, as stupid as that is. So he's taken a step back, and then from nowhere comes Deeds flying in, and they ended up having a fight that took them all 4 quarters of the ice, didn't it? And it was like, anyway, they're getting dragged apart. And then Sam Smith comes past the bench. So Sam had been in Cardiff the year before, and we had an argument in Cardiff about, I wasn't happy with something Sam did in the game and stuff like that. And he came back and he said something to me, and I'm really good friends with Sam now. And we've, made up our differences and get on great. But he said something to me, so I grabbed him from the bench. I remember Bolesky was there shaking his head. He's come fresh up the end of the day, thinking, what is going on here? This is a zoo. So I grabbed Sam Smith's shirt. Somebody else has grabbed me, and then next thing you know, everybody's grabbed everyone. There's this bit of a fight going on. And G comes across to me, and he's mad at me at this stage. He's like, Franny, get in that locker room, get in that locker room. And I was like, okay, enough's been done here. So I walked back into the dressing room, and there was stood Max Beerbrier in his sweat gear, or half in his sweat gear, and he starts walking the other way towards me. So I think he's like walking towards me, like as in to come and grab me in, and he goes straight past me. I look behind, and there's Egner beelining it for the bench, and it wasn't to get to me, it was to get to Max, because Max had cross-checked him in the head in the previous incident. So all this has flared up, and he's like literally about to hurdle the bench. So me and Max run at Egner then, and stop him hurdling the bench, and then get into a massive scrum on the bench. So that was the second one. And and I think we ended up with 19 match penalties at the back of that to Coventry's 0.
Front page of the Echo's the only time, we don't make the front page that
not very often. It's not for good things. But I remember, and I still think, okay, I got involved, and you shouldn't really, as a bench coach, you should be the one keeping your discipline and stuff like that. But I'm still adamant that if Ben Olsen doesn't come out with a handshake and approach the bench, it never starts.
Absolutely.
And so for them to get nothing was again one of those instances where we didn't have the best best side of the deal there. Yeah.
I just love that the question was, what did you say to Mike Geiger? He says, you didn't say anything to him, you said it to every other commentator.
Yeah, true.
Okay, quick fire questions from Chris Watkins, aptly at McWilliam24.
Yeah, so the answer is Mike McWilliam.
Yeah, to everyone. Yeah.
So we've covered quite a lot of them during the episode as kind of a matter of course anyway. One that sticks out, biggest fraud.
Oh God, this is going to get me in trouble
Yeah,
now.
this is going to get you in trouble.
This is what's going to
Well,
get
you're not going to give one of you. Okay, I'll stick mine up on the line. In recent years, I'm going to go with Nickerson. Nickerson, 6'4", huge guy. He's got the mohawk, the big ZZ Top goatee, and looks the part. He talks the part. He's got the best bark of any tough guy I've ever seen. But when you look at his records against the top heavyweights, it's extremely poor. And whenever he did get into a fight, because a lot of the time he talked his way out of fights because he had that kind of he went on the aggressive. But when he did get into that fight, I don't think he was very successful at all. And I remember the instance with Trevor Hendricks where he called Hendo on right at the start of the game. He wanted to set the tone in Cardiff for Belfast. Hendo steps up, and Hendo gets a good few in there, and he kind of goes for the takedown, and Nickerson buckles his knee. Yeah. I mean, he's a big guy. He buckled his knee. It happens. There's no way in that split second of that fight that Hendo is thinking, right, I'm going to do this guy's knee. It was just one of those things, and he talked about it. And then he eventually comes back from injury and he calls Hendo on again, and Hendo duly obliges and beats him again. And there was up in wasn't Fife he went to first, wasn't it? Yeah. The first year I remember he had got in, he was extremely out of shape, and in the first 3 minutes of the game he was huffing and puffing, and he's like throwing haymakers down on the face after. I think it was Lordo actually. It was Lordo. Who was totally defenceless at the time. Later, I think it wasn't later in the game, it was another game following that. He's chasing around Doug Clarkson. He probably knows that Doug Clarkson is this nice guy that's that may not oblige him. But Clarkson, to be fair, turns round, drops the gloves, and he convincingly beats him. So I think for a guy that is probably held in quite high esteem in terms of tough guys that look the part, talk the part, he to me is the biggest disappointment.
You're going to name someone from the Devils?
Nope. Two other honourable mentions I can think of. Jeff Smith, that played in Braehead.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Very big guy, supposedly a tough guy. I remember him trying to start a fight. I can't even remember who it was. It was one of our younger guys who was taking the face-off against him. So he stepped in. He's never taken a face-off in his life. He steps in to take the face-off and to cross-check. It might have been CJ. That's who it was. It was CJ. So he cross-checked CJ and he's trying to get things going. That was in the time when they had Chris Frank, they had Fitzgerald, and they had Jeff Smith kind of riding off their coattails. And he stepped in and cross-checked CJ. Up steps Josh Batch, who drops him with about 3 punches. And and then my final one was going back to, I think it was early Elite League or maybe Super League, Jeff Owasco. 6'8".
Yeah.
But so soft. And there's nothing better to play against than a soft big guy. Yeah. Because you can take a run up at them, you can get away with liberties, and this guy's not going to react. And I thought, at that size, all you got to do is just hold somebody, just at least get involved. And I don't think he played to his size at all.
Well, the next one.
Go for it.
Unless you've got
cheers, JD.
No, I'm trying to think who in the league. I don't know. I'm gonna do the Devil's angle then, as I'm a fan. I guess I can do that, and maybe just I don't know, from that horrible season. And I'm not saying he wasn't tough, but the reputation he came in with, and then just the whole pantomime, probably like an Andrew Conboy or something like that.
Wow. Yeah,
Todd Gillingham was the other one.
Todd Gillingham.
Yeah, I wasn't really involved in that season.
John Brill was in. Todd Gillingham came in to replace McWilliam. The intentions were good, but he was pretty awful. Saying that, you could beat me up very easily.
Surprise package?
I know who my surprise package is.
Go on.
No,
because I need time to think. You've got notes.
My surprise package, Andrew Hoffman.
Yeah.
So
Good shout.
we were looking for an offensive defenceman, out-and-out offensive defenceman, in the first year of the Steve King ownership, Todd Kalman and Andrew Lord as coach. And, you know, we had some names on the list, and then we had a lead on Andrew Hotham from someone that had played with him, and said this guy, he was actually talking to one of the other sides over here about a university deal. So we got in contact with him, and we said, you know, we can offer you know, 1 year university deal as well. He's like, how many school packages have you got? And you know, we were like, yeah, well, whatever it was, 3 at the time, and the team that was offering him only had 1, and he wasn't keen to go into school on his own. You know, he wanted some, you know, some buddies with him. So we looked at his numbers, and they were great. They all stacked up. He played in the DL for a little bit, which, you know, again is a good marker. One of our really sort of trusted references said on him, when you see him, you might be put off because he's a weird skater and he doesn't look like he's doing anything, but he's just magical when he's got the puck. And what a reference that is, you know? Yeah. And we're like, okay, our league is pretty tough. We play in this tiny, you know, pad, even smaller than North American sized pads. Is he robust enough to withstand it? And the guy was like, oh yeah, he's sneaky tough. Yeah, he's sneaky tough. When he goes, you know about it. And I think we saw that a lot, and I think he surprised a lot of people, didn't he? That they're, you know, seeing the top scoring D-man in the league, you know, they thought they're going to get under his skin by being physical, and you know, I think he led our team in fights too often, really, because we were desperate for him to stay on the ice because he could log 35, 40 minutes a game and get, you know, 3 points or whatever. But if there was a fight to be had, he was taking it.
Honourable mention for a guy who's currently on the team. I don't think Bryce Reddick could play as big as he can, but he does. I think for my overall surprise package, I'd go for a guy that Franny's already mentioned, probably Frank Evans. Didn't look as if he had the stature to be an out-and-out fighter, but some of the tilts with Frank Kovac, I think a couple of fights I remember with Tommy Plummer, and just ability to... I remember Kovac, I think, knocked a couple of his teeth out, and I remember it was at the Zamboni end of the Wales National Ice Rink, and after the fight, Frank just picked him up and went back to the bench, and he was happy as Larry. He didn't bother him at all. So I think for a guy who really surprised me and was a real tough team guy, Frank Evans.
Here we go. What I'm going to do, gentlemen, is I think we're going to come back to a couple of these at the beginning of the next episode. We've gone extremely long. Okay. And we've got a lot more to kind of cover. So we'll do a kind of quick fire Twitter questions at the beginning of the next episode, I think. If that's cool with you?
So it's a surprise package. I should have said Franny as well. When he fought Ed Courtenay, I was impressed.
And what you might not know about that Ed Courtenay fight was, in the very first second of it, I dislocated my shoulder.
Wow.
So I had the one operated on when I was 19. I'm quite loose jointed anyway, and earlier that season I knocked my left shoulder out of its socket a few times. In fact, I think I did it in the summer. I did it in the summer in the gym, and then kind of, you know, didn't want to miss a season, and then in training a couple of times, in games a couple of times it happened. And anyway, there is a story behind that. The night we were playing again back-to-back games, so back-to-back games are always bad for you know, for sparking up instance, or good depending on which way you're looking at it. We were, you know, in that era where we're punching above our weight and, you know, trying everything we can. Ed Courtenay was the player coach in Belfast, and when I was doing that kind of wind-up rat roll or whatever, trying to do whatever I can for the team, the best people you can ever target are player coaches. Because it's 2 for 1. Because not only they're always good players because, you know, they got that dual role, so they have to be a good player because otherwise you just have them as a coach. But they're also the coach, and if you get under their skin, they've lost their focus. If they can take a penalty, they're not there to direct their team. So I targeted Ed Courtenay, and I was finishing every hit on him, no matter how late it was, how early it was. It didn't matter. I was finishing those hits, so I could see him get rattled. And then at the time, Belfast had on their team Paul Moran, son of Gary Moran in GM of Nottingham, and on one of the face-offs in the game, Mopes comes up to me, and I knew him really well, and he's like, Franny, Ed sent me out to fight you. I was like, okay, look, I said, you got to do, don't worry about it. You got to do what you got to do. So, so we're going, yeah. And he's like, oh no. He goes, no, I can't be bothered, to be honest. And I don't think he thought that too much of Courtney anyway. But he's like, and I was like, look, if you got to do it, like, no hard feelings. We can go, and we'll be fine. He's like, no, don't worry. So anyway, so that didn't happen that night. So knowing how I got under Courtney's skin, especially if sending someone out to fight me, I carried on doing it in Cardiff, and we went 2 or 3 goals down. So I remember making a few hits, and he was getting mad. And then behind the play, I think I sticked him in the back of the legs, and he was turning around, and I could see he was just exploding. And then the gloves come off, and I was like, "Yes, we're in one here, job done." And I remember grabbing him, and of course I'm a lot shorter than him, and I had to reach up high. And as I reached up high with my left, my shoulder joint just fell out underneath, and it's basically sitting in my armpit there. So I'm hanging on with this, like, there's no power in it whatsoever, and I'm trying to get close. I'm already given up sort of 7 inches, I think, on Courtney. And I was trying sort of jersey jabs with, like, a dislocated shoulder and all that. And I mean, I think we ended up getting into a spin cycle, and he just hammers down a couple on me. But there's no way I was letting on that I was hurt. I wasn't going to the dressing room, so I went in and sat the penalty, and carried on chirping him in there because I knew I was under his skin, and telling him all sorts of things about what his teammates thought of it, and all kind of that. And we ended up, I think, scoring. We scored 2 goals on that in that 5-minute spell where he was out of the game. We scored 2 goals, which was kind of achieved my objective. It cost me a shoulder operation later on, but and to make it worse, we ended up losing the game.
Yeah, we did. That's a pretty good point to finish on, Gav. I think that's toughness. I think that's bona fide toughness there.
That is putting your body on the line.
Stupidity.
Putting your body on the line for essentially nothing in the end. But what a story to end on, indeed. Keep connecting with us on Twitter. We're at BTB Franny, behind the bench, of course. We're our podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, pretty much all good podcast providers, and one bad one. Mm-hmm. So
and the podcast does feature John Donovan as well. Let's make that point.
Of course it does.
Thank you, Franny.
Of course.
Not that I'm precious by not being involved with things.
But gentlemen, John, thank you very much
Thank you,
once
guys,
again for your insight and, quite frankly, scary memory.
Yeah, for helping us actually remember stuff, because I've forgotten 90% of what you said.
I could do research for weeks and weeks, but there's at least 10 things that you remember that don't seem to appear on the internet.
I wasn't a popular kid. The devils were my friends.
And of course, Neil Francis, thank you very much for all your stories and your honesty, and I can only hope that Matt Nickerson stays in Finland for the foreseeable future.
He knows I'm joking.
Gentlemen, thank you, and thank you all for listening. We'll talk about it. For now, I've been Gareth Hewish, I'm John Donovan, and Neil Francis. Thank you very much for listening. Good night.